Yes, welcome. I'm just welcoming Simon Strauss and Mathieu Segers as well. I'm really glad you're all here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Annemarijn Epker, and I'm a program maker at the Balie and project leader of the forum, as Yuri already mentioned. And I'm also really happy to welcome you. It would be better if we could met in person, but yeah, I'm also happy that we could proceed with it like this. So this is actually the very first program of the Forum on European Culture this year, which will have a hybrid format. So some of you are in Amsterdam and will participate live on stage today, tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday. But some of you will also join us online. I'm actually really happy that we still could organize this forum with so much enthusiasm also from all participants. So the Civic Council on European Democracy is a working session and an experiment. It's the first time we're doing it. And we think it's really important to organize these deliberations with participants from all over Europe in order to improve our democracy and to dig into the concept of a European demos and try to find out what binds us together, actually. So the main question of today is actually, if we want our European democracies to function better, what is needed for this? And which potential solutions and innovations and ingredients can we think of in order to increase the EU's legitimacy? And I'm sure you all saw this already because you all read your briefing document very, very profoundly, I think. But just as a reminder, the setup of this session, we have asked two of you to prepare a statement of today. Today that will be Yuri Albrecht, who will open after my introduction, and Livia Gerster. And I also asked some of you to reflect on this. But very much this is an open discussion where I would like to encourage everyone to participate, raise your hand if you like to say something, and maybe some others have also prepared something. So this is really an open working session where everyone's participation is really encouraged and stimulated. So yeah, by the end of this session, I hope we will end within 2 hours. We will have hopefully a list of ingredients that we can take with us to the second session of tomorrow, where there will also be some persons who prepared something, and we will go on with the discussion tomorrow. So yes, I think this is everything. The audience can ask questions. That is maybe important to notice, but I mentioned this already in the beginning as well. And yeah, on that note, I would like to give the floor to Yuri to open with a statement.
Okay, thank you, Annemarijn. Well, we thought that to open a discussion, it would be good to see whether we could sort of undo some myth about Europe and see whether we could discuss this sort of myth. I've sent something which I prepared for the opening speech later on today around. But I will not read it out. I think you can read it, or you have read it, or it's boring to read this out. It would be better, I would say, to just explain how I would.
Yuri.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I just realized I forgot something really important. I wanted to do a short introduction round where everyone just briefly states who he or she is, and so that everyone knows already who's in the room. So sorry to interrupt you, but maybe we can do that first before your speech.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, can we start in the upper left corner with Anna? If you turn your microphone on, we can hear you as well.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello everyone. I'm Anna Galas-Kosil. I'm a curator at Biennale Warszawa, Warsaw Biennial. I'm responsible for international projects and program, and we are an institution that basically we are trying to discuss topics that are not so much present in the mainstream discussion in Poland. So cultural and socio-political issues. Thank you.
And Flavia? Can you put your mic on? Yeah. It's still early in the morning.
Morning, everyone. My name is Flavia Kleiner from Switzerland. I am the co-founder of a political movement which successfully fought back the biggest right-wing populist party in Switzerland, SVP. And we develop strategies and tactics on how to fight back the right-wing populists in our country by basically framing our topics around liberal institutions and the value and the importance of it. Yes, that's what I did. Yeah.
Thank you. Orlando?
Oh, hello, yes. So I'm Orlando, and I am a historian and teacher at the University of London, Birkbeck College. And most of my work, I guess, has been about Russia, but I think I've been invited here because I wrote a book recently called The Europeans. And I count myself certainly as one. I post-Brexit don't have given up my UK passport and have travelled here from Italy, where I've decided to live on a German passport. So there you are, I'm a citizen of Europe.
Thank you. Reka?
Hi, I'm Reka Kinga-Pop, currently sort of voluntarily already sheltering in place again in Budapest, but working with the Vienna-based online magazine. I'm editor-in-chief of Eurozine. I'm a Hungarian journalist von Haus aus, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys.
Thanks so much. Nicolo?
Hello, I'm Niccolo Milanese. I'm Director of European Alternatives, which has been organizing for transnational democracy for the past 15 years or so. And European Alternatives will hopefully be hosting many of you in Palermo if we manage to organize a future session of this council physically. I also am the convener of something called Citizens Take Over Europe, which is calling for citizens to co-create the future of Europe.
Thank you. Mathieu?
Hi, my name is Mathieu Segers. I'm a professor of contemporary European history at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. There I'm leading an interfaculty research program on European affairs, let's call it that. And I'm also a columnist for some Dutch media. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And then we have Simon Strauss.
Hi there, I'm Simon. I'm very looking forward to the discussion as well. I'm an historian and the author and the journalist for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, leading newspaper in Germany in the cultural section. And I'm also a co-founder of Arbeit an Europa, Working on Europe, an association which was developed out of a young group of intellectuals after the Brexit vote to try to get a cultural answer on the political issues we're facing. And our main project is the European Archive of Voices, which we'll probably hear a little bit more on it later. And yeah, very much looking forward to the discussion and this day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Livia?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Livia Gerster, and I'm also a politics journalist with Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany. And I specialized in Islam and the Middle East, but now I'm with the Sunday edition writing about everything. So also Europe once in a while. And like Simon, I'm part of the Arbeit an Europa, Working on Europe Association.
Thank you. Ritis?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ritis Zemkauskas, and I am a curator for the Kaunas European Capital of Culture 2022. And also I'm an associated professor at Vytautas Magnus University. My field is journalism. And I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be among you, very versatile individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. Francesca?
I apologize, my connection keeps on going on away. I went inside, hoping it doesn't do it anymore. So hello everybody, I am Francesca Melandri, I am in Rome, I'm Italian, I'm a writer. I've been a screenwriter many years. And then since 10 years, I've written 3 books. And so that's now what I do. I'm a novelist, basically, and I also make documentaries.
Thank you so much. And Francesco, you will also join in the program later on today, right? In the forums program.
Yes, this evening.
Yeah. Calypso, welcome.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Calypso Nicolaidis, and I am currently in transition from being a professor at Oxford to one at EUI in Florence. And I have loved to collaborate with Balie in the past. Looking forward to this discussion. And I've had for 20 years developed a theory of democracy, which we might talk about later. There's quite a group of us developing these ideas, and so I'm very interested in this exchange.
Thank you so much. Fazil. Oh, we don't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Now I think it's okay. Yeah, hi everyone. Nice for, that's very thankful for having me here. My name is Vasil Cherepanin. I represent Visual Culture Research Center, an independent cultural institution based in Kyiv, in Ukraine, which is also the institutional organizer of the Kyiv Biennial, and we have been partners with the Balie, with the forum, as well as with the European Alternatives and Trans-Europa Festival for years and years. So I'm really happy to see my comrades and colleagues here, as well as with the Warsaw Biennial, of course. So looking forward to talking to you.
Great, thank you so much, Vasil. And then we have some observers. So I see, and there's a group of students from Groningen, I think. And I think Senka is the teacher. So maybe you would like to say something on behalf of your group, Senka?
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I would apologize. I don't have a camera because we were told that we should not have one, so you don't see our faces. So we are a class on culture, fear, and insecurity in contemporary Europe. This class studies how Europe is produced and contested through different discourses on crisis and crisis management practices. And we're very happy for the opportunity to observe the discussion. So thanks a lot and good luck.
Thank you, Senka. Then we have Simon de Leeuw, who, Simon, can you say hi to the group maybe? I'm not sure if you have your camera. Simon will take notes today, and he's one of the program editors of the forum.
Yes, I will be here. I'll just activate my video. I will be, hello, I'm downstairs in the Balie in the cafe, meticulously writing along with you. And really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a program editor for the Forum on European Culture, working for DutchCulture, the Center of International Cooperation. In case you don't know DutchCulture, it is the Dutch equivalent of the Goethe Institute, you could say, but then a lot smaller. Looking forward to hearing all of you, and I'll be keeping my ears open.
Thanks, Simon. And then Laura Gablier from European Cultural Foundation is also joining us.
Hi. Hi, everyone, and many thanks for having me part of your conversations. My name is Laura Gablier. I'm working with the European Cultural Foundation, as Anne-Marie mentioned, which is also one of the organizations that supports the forum. I'm familiar with a bunch of you as well. I think our work has crossed in the past. So thanks. And I'll also have my ear open.
It's great you're joining us, Laura. And then I see Geraldine Schwartz coming in as well. So Geraldine is one of the participants in the council as well. Geraldine, welcome. Do you hear us?
Second. Yes.
Yes.
I think I'm sorry for being late. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, well, I'm looking forward to this discussion, very ambitious discussion. Deconstructing the myths of Europe. I'm a French German living mostly in Berlin, but also in Paris. I'm an author and journalist and documentary filmmaker, and I'm very much interested in the questions of memory in Europe and how we can share our memories in order to build a new myth.
A new myth of common descent. Thank you so much, Geraldine. I think we had everyone now. So then I would like to ask Yuri to start again with his contribution for today. If you put your mic on,
yeah, right. Thank you. Wonderful seeing you all. Again, my name is Yuri Albrecht. I'm the director of the Balie and the founder and curator of the Forum on European Culture. I'm also the chair of the Open Society, the board chair of the Open Society Foundation in Europe. And we've started here at the Balie about 8 years ago, the European Press Prize. And I'm a member of the board still of the European Press Prize. And we would try to see whether with the 3 sessions we're having with the Civic Council, whether we could come up with something like a statement, which maybe with the help of the European Press Prize, we can publish all over Europe. That's one of the ideas, but let's see whether we can come up with something like a working paper or a piece of a journalistic piece. I did my DPhil in Oxford on nations and nationalism, on national minorities. And I thought deconstructing myths, that's what we try to do today and tomorrow. And one of them is, of course, the myth, and I sent around a sort of an introduction, which I'm not going to read out, but just very briefly explain and see whether we could discuss on it. More and more you hear European nationalist parties say that there is no such thing as a European demos, and therefore there is no possibility of a European democracy. I've heard Le Pen say that many times, and a lot of political parties who look up to her, especially Thierry Baudet in our country. He just mentioned it in this autumn again, when the opening of the parliamentary year here in Holland was. You know, there's no such thing as a demos, and I represent the Dutch demos, and by that simple fact, a European democracy is void and impossible. Well, I thought that's interesting. If we take that argument seriously, which we might or might not do, but if we would take it seriously, there are many things to ask, of course. It's interesting that they say that there's no such a possibility of a European demos. I would say that if we believe with Benedict Anderson that a nation is something like a group which shares a myth of common descent, then I would say the myth of common descent of the Europeans, and not the people of the European Union, but the Europeans as we are here, not all members of the European Union, but just Europeans, is much older. That myth is much older, and I would say much stronger and much more profound than the nationalistic myth which has been laid over it during the 18th and 19th centuries. So if you would say that a nation is something of a population which believes in a myth of common descent, or which has a legal history in common, which you could say is one of the ways to define a nation or a folk or a people, then you could say that, of course, the European people is much more vividly around as a ontological entity, or as a being, because we have a common shared legal history which starts with the Romans, with Justinianus, and with the Code Napoleon. We have much more and much older a legal history than most nation states. You could also say, of course, that if the nation is defined by a shared culture, then you could say, the shared culture is much older than all the artificial nation states cultures which it's been painted over it. Because Erasmus from Rotterdam was not a Dutchman, because the Netherlands didn't exist in that period. He was from Rotterdam, and that's what he was. Or you could say that Leonardo da Vinci was not an Italian, because Italy didn't exist. It was long before the Risorgimento, and he was from Vinci, maybe from Florence, or you could say from Paris in the later part of his life when he was serving François Ier. But he was certainly not an Italian, because Italy didn't exist. So if we take the sort of the phrase serious, that if there is no demos, there's no democracy, and that there's need of a demos in order to have a functioning democracy, and you could question that, of course, but if we take that discourse seriously, which I think might be interesting to do, because it gets traction a lot, especially now, even nowadays in the Netherlands, which has no tradition at all of this nationalistic parties. I think it's for the first time in a few hundred years that we have something of a nationalistic party which actually makes that argument that there's such a thing as the Dutch people and that we're not capable of living together with other peoples because we're not the same people. I think at least it's an interesting exercise to go into that and take that argument seriously. Of course, there's something that, there's another aspect to it which I think is very interesting, that the right-wing popular parties say that they represent the people. Well, that's interesting. They might or they might not, but certainly not everybody's voting for them. So that claim is a bit rash, I would say. But on the other hand, there is, of course, widespread discontent among people who vote for them. I would say it looks a lot like it's the old class discontent. The people who are left behind by globalization tend to be able to be lured by nationalists into sort of an idea of if their people would be at the helm of their state, everything would be all right, which is, of course, a sort of a conversation we've been having in Europe in the first part of the 20th century, in the latest part of the 19th century in particular, that, you know, that all class problems would be solved if we would be amongst ourselves. But I would say that would be countered by amongst ourselves means we are amongst ourselves, because in Europe, everybody who is part of the European culture and the European sphere is already amongst ourselves, and that's multiple. It's not one. It's not a blood and one ethnic group. No, it's a much broader definition of what we would call a folk or a nation or a people, or a demos. I think that, you know, again, it's an important discourse, because if we don't, this whole discourse by the people and representing the people and being the people and speaking for the people will be done by populist parties like Thierry Baudet's, who's really, really capable of doing that. And to my actually surprise, I would say, if I look at the political history of the Netherlands. But and you can see that in many other countries. I'm sure that you're aware of these sort of politicians in the places where you're around. I'll leave it at that as an introduction. I've written it down a little bit, and I'm very curious to hear whether where I'm wrong or where or what your thoughts are on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuri. We have asked two people to prepare already a bit of a reaction, but I want to make it also into an organic discussion. But maybe we could start with Flavia first, and then I will go to the rest.
Thank you so much, and certainly thank you, Yuri, for your initial thoughts. I would just maybe make 3 points. The first is on this European identity and the common legal history, which I find quite a convincing argument that you raised, to say that actually rule of law, institutions, human rights, that's a thing we share here in Europe, and that's a strong narration, I would say, about the European idea as an idea of a liberal society and a liberal continent in the end. So I think that's a point we can strongly refer to, because it also could make people more understand how also this is kind of a substrate of all the different values, but of the European of the Europeans, but it's in a more enlightened way, instead of values, which could also mean whatever. But it brings it back to really like a common law and the constitution, and values which are represented in a constitution. So that's what I found a really strong argument, and I think we should think more about that. My second point would be a question that you kind of also came up with, the whole argument of right-wing populists about the nation state, and that in the end this would be the gold standard, and still it is, and so on. And I mean, one problem I have with it is that it's very status quo or even history past oriented. And the second problem is really, for me, the basic question: what is the finality of politics, or what should be the finality of our political order, how we want to be organized? And that's very much where it comes to me, to the basic problem I have with this right-wing populist argument, that to me it's not the sovereignty of a nation state and kind of the independence of a nation state, but to me it's very much the freedom of the individual. That's what, for me, Europe is about, and that's what actually is the big achievement we have here with the European Union. And to me, sovereignty shouldn't pay off for people. It shouldn't pay off for a nation state. I don't see the point of it, really. And really, at the very moment with Brexit, if you see that sovereignty of a nation state means losing jobs, means tearing families apart, means, I do not see the point of national sovereignty. If I should bring it to a really extreme point, I mean, North Korea is, as a state, very free, but the individual very unfree. I mean, I'm just really outspoken, but you see. And the third point, since you already mentioned it also in your expose, is the Swiss case, kind of, and here I see myself as a representative of that nation to speak about it. And what I think is really strong about the direct democratic system we have in Switzerland, that we vote time and again also about just laws, not only, but also constitutional questions. To me, this is, of course, for some people who might be very skeptical about the direct democracy, will think, well, wow, but this gives a lot of power to the people, and can they really, really take it? And, are they responsible about this power? But I'm a big fan of direct democracy because I think in the long run, it gives a lot of responsibility to citizens, and we should really trust them, because why should we not trust them deciding on specific legal questions if we then trust them to vote for parties, And I think it's just a question if you believe in a citizen and his capability to take decisions or not. And I think citizens also take more responsibility if you give it to the citizen. And I think it's just in our all interest in the long run to have responsible citizens. And it also means to kind of time and again, how to say in German, it's Aneignung der Institutionen. So you time and again, maybe Livia, you can help me, or Simon. But, in the sense, it's kind of you reconquer these institutions time and again. And I think that's a really important thing to see. And what we did in Switzerland, just to also show you how this can be a tool to successfully fight back right-wing populists. Because the right-wing populists really, in elections, they made big ads where they said, Swiss vote for the Swiss People's Party. Kind of meaning that everyone who doesn't vote for that party cannot be really Swiss. And, that's where we kind of managed to beat them at the ballot box. And that was such a successful way to show them and to prove that they were wrong, that actually a big majority, even far, like a big chunk of people don't believe the way they believe. And I think that was so successful. And in Switzerland, and maybe this can be a last thought, but the myth that we often refer to is we are a nation of will, eine Willensnation. We are together, the 4 different language parts and ethical backgrounds, because we want to be together. And this could be maybe a thought, for the European Union as well, because what I think is one of the key success recipes in Switzerland is that the borders between ethnicity and language and religion, it's never the same congruent border, it's always having different lines. And this makes the whole net really strong in Switzerland. So these are some of my thoughts. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Flavia. I think it's really interesting to see Switzerland as a way of, as an example for living together in the European Union. Thank you so much. Is there anyone who wants to react to the first 2 things we heard, both from Yuri and from Flavia? Yeah, I see. I'll start with Francesca.
Very briefly, I'll be less constructive than I usually like to be. I'll be more critical. I think direct democracy is a very wonderful idea, but we have had recently, at least with Brexit, a very wonderful and terrible example of how it can go horribly wrong. And direct democracy without a very clean and transparent media system, without a system of accountability for politicians who claim things which are simply false. So in a way, without all of this, it's, as we have seen with Brexit, it can be not only risky, but also tragic. So I think direct democracy is a wonderful ideal, but I also think one has to operate on the reality of the world one is in. And as I see it, maybe in this, I don't know, I'm too gloomy, but the atmosphere that I see in Europe is not one of a very democratic and conscious biosphere of political discussion. And in other way, I wouldn't see it as a starting point, maybe as a long-term aim, but in my opinion, there is a lot more to build before. And that is maybe more the demos, which I can't remember his name, was talking about before. And demos means truly democratic society which can make informed decisions, because I'm very afraid of direct democracy when it is allowed to make not informed decisions. The effects can be really dire.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Before we go to Fasil and Anna, who also wanted to raise something, I was wondering, Flavia, how do you see this? Because you have seen this in Switzerland as well, right? How this works.
Yeah, one thing is really, I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not a governmental organization. I'm precisely an NGO representing here. And actually, we try to inform the public better through our campaigns. And of course, you can also say there are also forces which will invest in like informing the public with lies and wrong information. And I totally see that. But I think in the end, it can also be a task for citizens to create a better informed discussion and to create a broader public and you know, to work on a democratic culture, what I would say. But of course, with the example of Brexit, you know, I would say if you only every, I don't know, 10 years or so, you would give people the right for a referendum, it can go in any directions. Of course, Switzerland is a specific case also, I would say, because we are, you know, we're doing this 4 times a year. So we know in a way what responsibility comes with it, and that we cannot just make a sign, you know, and as Brexit was seen, and it's kind of a ventil, you know, for everything you're unhappy about, and then you tell the government to, you know. That's at least how I see it a bit. And of course the media, and that's maybe if I could bring it to a broader context, I mean, to a European demos, we would also need a European public or like a European media, you know, system in a way. And that's maybe another point we could discuss here. Yeah, I would maybe leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Flavia. Fasil, you also raised your hand. Would you like to reflect on this idea of European demos?
Yeah, just really very shortly. Thanks, Anne-Marijn, for this possibility. Just as a voice from beyond the European wall, so to say, because I'm totally in line with this liberal leftist argument about open borders, and it's not the national security which really defines the European identity and common European history, but it's rather the, as you said, Flavia, the freedom of the individual. But at the same time, I'm curious what happens if we apply this argument to the context which is outside the European Union, like Ukraine, for example. So, I mean, that really very simply, it's really very nice to speak about open borders and that it is not the national sovereignty that really matters. But what if when the national sovereignty is in danger? What if when the country is under occupation? So in the wartime, I mean, that these arguments are really like a bit, you apply them on a shifting ground. It's not really clear because, you know, it's really very hard to tell the Ukrainians or the Palestinians right? That national sovereignty doesn't matter. You have to fight for open borders. But if the borders are at war, you don't have the freedom of the individual. So basically, I think that the history of the EU in the second part of the 20th century actually shows that first you have to set up peace on your borders in order to trespass them. You cannot trespass the idea of borders when they are at war. So I mean that this kind of argumentation should also face some realpolitik challenges, which are outside the EU. So, and which are also defined in the logic and the modus operandi how the EU operates, as for me. This is really very short.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vasil. Reka, would you like to react to this?
Yeah, just
and then Anna.
Yeah. Just offering briefly, I think I wanted to raise this before Vasil, but then I thought he's definitely going to mention this, that Flavia's point applies only in situations, or can be applied only in situations when, for instance, you are not facing a direct and obvious external threat, like, you know, foreign occupation or warfare of any sorts. But I think a middle ground between these would be to say that national sovereignty in itself is not a guarantor of anything. That's not like a fully loaded notion of all the freedoms and all the sort of capacities that you're looking for, but it is only one step of a very complex and robust buildup of what you're looking for. And it also has to consist of individual and group freedoms and sort of group rights, which we also know that are definitely necessary for people to be able to advocate for themselves and to be able to, you know, find their fortune in nation states, which are sometimes or oftentimes not originally built for them to thrive. So I think if we say that national sovereignty is not meaningless, but national sovereignty is just one step of the way, that probably gives us a bit more complex image, which allows both for acknowledging the necessary nature of sovereignty in certain situations, but also admits that national sovereignty, quite like I think Ukraine is in a huge political shift, specifically because national sovereignty used to be the campaign slogan under which everything was supposed to be you know, just passed over and not taken seriously, and a justification for corruption or a justification of ripping people of their rights. So I think a bit more complex of a picture is very easy actually to draw here. Just thinking about these as systems that build on each other.
Thank you so much, Reka. I think this is a really interesting point. Anna, would you like to react to this?
Yeah, I would like to ask to add to this discussion actually the issue that I think that we have a really big problem with the European project, which was actually thought as a nation state project. So I totally agree with this, what Flavia started to say, that the nation state doesn't represent anymore the people, the Europeans, people living in our continent, and the parliaments do not represent the people anymore. It's of course the complex problem of representation itself, and I think that today we really see that the real politics are happening actually on the streets. We have many protests, like Friday for Futures can be mentioned, but also protest in Warsaw, a protest in Paris, and people are really trying to force their problems on the streets because the politicians and the parliaments are not answering anymore on this, what is happening. And I think that we also need a kind of universal project that could be easily understood, because the right wing actually has got such a thing. and they are really forcing their vision. I will just quote here some words written by Polish sociologist Jan Sowa in the introduction to the book with essays about the universalism, in which he says that it is my strong belief that the global and universal nature of the challenges that we are facing now, such as climate change, mass migration, the unchecked influences of the financial institution, right-wing terrorism, I will add here the COVID and the pandemic as well, make the foundation of any kind of new progressive universalism a task of the utmost importance. If we agree that these are the threats that humanity can successfully counter only as a unified subject, we are in an urgent need to establish some kind of common denominator, a universal perspective that would allow us to look beyond particular attachments to race, ethnicity, gender, or nation, and to define all women and men as just equal members of human race, as just equal members of Europe. And unfortunately, no such projects seem to be anywhere on the horizon. Even European Union, the most advanced attempt to shape existing political reality beyond the confines of nation states. And I just want to add one thing that during the biennial 2019, we did a project with Jonas Stahl that was actually a kind of experiment. So
Jonas Stahl is a Dutch artist, just for the people who don't know. Yeah.
This project was in a frame of the general topic of the biennial, Let's Organize Our Future, which was an answer for the right-wing historical and past focus. And we wanted to experiment with a kind of new institution or a new form that could represent people beyond the nation state level. So if we talk about our meeting from the beginning as a kind of experiment, maybe, I think that culture has got like really strong tools to prepare such a laboratory or experiment for social and political changes. Thank you.
Anna, can I ask you an additional question, maybe, because I very much hear what you say about that we need a universal story, maybe a new European story. And of course, one of the goals of this session as well is to try to find some ingredients for that story. And I was wondering, do you have an idea about what ingredients could be in this story, or would you like to suggest anything?
Well, I think that it's an issue of the discussion. I have to say that in this book that we prepared and the conference about universalism, actually we didn't find the answers how this project should look like, but definitely it should be a counterbalance for their right-wing vision. If Flavia was talking about the media or some projects that could go grassroots, I would say, and would really promote Europe, I think that we would need something like that, and we would need definitely culture as a very strong point of it. If in 2015 Pascal Hille was writing that there's no Europe without culture, and it was like a very strong quote, but I think that during all these years in all EU programs, in many projects, we didn't see this change. And if I think about the right-wing and law and justice ruling in Poland, I think that they will much more take over media, they are taking over education, and without like strong projects for this part of people's life, we will not get this universal new idea for Europe.
And before, I'm also very curious to hear what the rest of the group thinks about it, but why is it especially culture, according to you, that is so important in this, Anna?
Because I think that culture can be this kind of laboratory for socio-political changes, and it can bring people more reflection. And I also think that culture is something that unites people. We need to give them a kind of real vision that will make this project think that it's their project as well, and not only the project of some kind of institutions and bureaucrats that are beyond their normal lives.
All right. Is there anyone else from the group? First Nicola, Geraldine, and Calypso.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the issue of universalism and I'm very much in line with what Anna was saying about the need for a new kind of universalism, but I want to add in the consideration it needs to be a new kind of universalism that is conscious of all the ways that universalism can go wrong. And when I was listening to Yuri's excellent introduction, I was asking myself firstly whether it can really be true that Europe has a common legal history. If I think about the Ottomans or even the UK and common law and its differences with a more continental form of law, I'm not sure about this. And then that opens up to a much larger question about whether there's any way you can talk about common descent without creating a kind of imperialistic project. And after all, one way of reading European history is lots of people claiming the mantle of the Roman Empire. And this business of empires, we know very well in Europe, the ways that can go totally wrong. And I take the opportunity to draw our awareness to the fact that we are, as far as I can see, a group of white people talking about common European identity. And so we need to be conscious of our own limitations. And that, for me, is a very crucial, perhaps the central message of European history and a core part of the European project. Jan Patočka, the Czech philosopher, used to talk about living in problematicity, living with the problematic natures of our own history and our universal aspirations, not trying to eradicate all the problems that are involved. And that means living with ambiguity, living with the fact that our traditions are mixed and complex, just like our history. And that seems to me what the right-wing, far right-wing voices want to get rid of. They want always to have these kinds of simple and binary categories. And I don't think we should fall into the trap of trying to respond with the same kind of simplicity and binary identities as they want to present. Of course, we have a problem in the public discourse that it can often be much more powerful to talk in simple and binary terms and appear very weak to say, yes, but it's all very complicated and ambiguous. But we need to find ways of turning the problematic nature of Europe's history and its future into our strength. And I think, to close, that the power of culture, or at least a particular kind of culture, is that it's able to embrace ambiguity and contradiction. Keats talked about our negative capability, our ability to bring together two ideas which appear to conflict, but to see the way that they combine. He was talking about the nature of poetry as our exercise in our negative capability. And I think that this needs to be the strength and meaning of the European cultural project.
Thank you so much, Nicolo. We should embrace ambiguity. Geraldine.
Yes, hello. I was thinking of a quote of Fritz Bauer, who was a prosecutor in post-war Germany and played an essential role in the Auschwitz trials. In general, he played an essential role in forcing Germany to confront its history. Fritz Bauer said, you can have the best laws, you can have the best constitution, but if you don't have fair people, which means people who are able to make a judgment, a fair judgment, your democracy will be weak. And so it is indeed about people. But how do you change people? How do you educate people to be good Democrats? So I think the key word for me is political education more than culture. Culture is included in political education if you want, but I think this is the key word. And a good way, second to me, to transmit this political education is through the past, through history. I'm half German, half French, and I've written a book about that topic. I think through dealing with the past, we can teach to the people to be aware of their own fallibility. I think being aware of your own fallibility is a condition of a good functioning democracy, so that people understand that an opinion is not always a fact, and that when they go voting because they're angry, they might be a consequence. Most of the people who vote for this populist party actually are for democracy, they are for freedom. They are also in a way for an open society because they take profit of the open society and of an open Europe. But they don't realize actually the consequence of voting for such a political party. Then the other thing that shapes the awareness of a political education through confronting the past is that the manipulation strategies, which were already mentioned here, of populist parties and demagogues are very similar today than they were 1 century ago. So if you pick up in history this knowledge of manipulation strategies, you can shape and also an awareness of these manipulation strategies among the people to make them more clever and to give them the opportunity to protect themselves against demagogues. But as we can see today in Europe, populist parties are quite successful. And I think in general, what we can say is that some people are losing sight of the fact that the human being should never be a mean, but used as a mean, but always be the goal. This is what I always repeat to people who admire Russia's Putin or China, for example. And this is a lesson we actually learn from history, that when man stops to be human, which means when man stops to put the human in the center, he destroys himself. And this is probably the message that we can share in all Europe. We don't have the same history as this was mentioned, but we have this common denominator that we all experience totalitarianism. That means a system where the human being is a mean and not the end. And we also experience something positive. We experience that the totalitarianism was defeated. And this is also something which should be part of the European narration, because the European narration should not only be based on a negative legacy, on a negative memory of the war and the Holocaust, but we should always remember that this has been defeated and that democracy was built and that the dignity of citizens were restored. So therefore, I think what we can share are values, but we have to understand where these values come from. If we just share values by imposing them to the citizens, this will never work. So citizens have to understand why we have these values of peace, democracy, and freedom, and how much it was fought for it. And I think through this understanding that these values have a history, we can shape a consciousness and a sense for responsibility among the citizens, which I personally miss today. So it's not only the institutions who are not doing their homework here, it's also the European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. I was just wondering, you were speaking about political education, and we just heard Flavia spoke about all the referendums they're doing in Switzerland, for example. Could organizing referendums also be part of this political education, or do you see it totally different, and should something else be done?
No, I don't see it different. It is a result of it. I mean, I have to, add that Switzerland is a small country. It is a bit of a miracle that it works in Switzerland with these 3 languages and these 3 different cultures. So I would say what happens in Switzerland is not obligatory adaptable to other countries. First, I think the first step is really this political education. In Germany, there is something which is called Center for Political Education, which is in every region of Germany. In France, because I'm also from France, we don't have that. At school, we have a lot of culture in France, which is fantastic, but we don't have political education. And at school in Germany, at least when I was at school, there was this political education. So I think this is really the first step in order that the people actually understand that in a democracy, they have a role to play. They are not victims. They are not actually victims of institutions, but they have a part to play. And I think this is where the European Union should put the focus today.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. We're going to Calypso, then Simon and Mathieu. But first, Calypso.
Yes, right. So I think that all sorts of fascinating things have been said, and I don't want to repeat them. But first of all, that you raised, nice provocation at the beginning, is very useful because, what are we wanting to do? Okay, there's this myth there cannot be a European democracy. And then there's a second part to the sentence, because there is no European demos. And I think what we all share in this group is that no, hey guys, there can be a European level democracy against nationalists and populists, etc. We all agree on that. The question is whether the because is something we agree on. And for my part, well, you say because actually, no, that's not true. We do have a European demos. And what I want to say is, well, maybe there's a more ambitious response, which is that there can be a deep, vibrant European democracy, even if there is no or not yet a European demos. And I'm pretty agnostic about whether, it will come about or should come about. So the emphasis should be on democracy, not on the single demos. And let me just give you 3 reasons, building on what, we heard. One is the question, a deep question of identity, and many of you have picked up on it. Geraldine was just talking about it, and Nicolo, obviously, and I really much build on what he says, because as soon as you end your paper and you have we the people and you give all these examples, now it looks and feels the same, but it's not the same. Really? So the question of mimetism, the danger of mimetism in peoplehood is really important because can we build a European people that is not of an exclusionary nature, that is not about othering? We talk about universalism, but it's very hard to do that if you just say, well, our big ideal is one European people. And to echo Nicolo, Geraldine, you were just talking about memory, very Eurocentric, our war and our Holocaust, yes, a memory on which we built. But what about the memory that the rest of the world has of colonialism and imperialism? Again, Nicolo. Wow, that really matters. So how does this talk of European peoplehood echo in the rest of the world? And so, we can borrow from the story of the construction of the imagined community in a civic way, as you were saying. And we can also push back against nationalism. But do we really need to build this on a European people as opposed to a citizens plural Europe? And I would say a democracy, that is a union of peoples who govern together but not as one, that are engaged in something much harder, which is horizontal mutual recognition, not just a vertical commonality. That's really, really hard. For me, it's much harder than trying to say we are one European people, because the mutual recognition of our cultures at all sorts of levels, in all sorts of ways, is the key. And the second and third, very quickly. The second is that we need to ask, several of you spoke about Ukraine, Fastia was speaking about Ukraine, what is the locus of individual emancipation? If we all agree that this is about the individual. And Reka was also talking about sometimes national belonging is the emancipatory level, has been. Let's look at, or local democracy, Hong Kong and all the rest of it. We don't need to. So there are all sorts of togetherness that are not at the supranational, but lower. And my third point is, why are we having this discussion? If it is about Yuri, you said the power who has the power to decide? Because at the end of the day, we can have big conceptual discussion, but it matters who has the power at the European level. Well, if we speak about demos, if it's all based on a demos, then we have the danger of aggregation and the so-called tyranny of majority. What happens to small states, to smaller communities? We will bypass them. As soon as you talk about one people, you talk about one government. Mimetism all the way up. That it will be one government, one president, all of this oneness. And at the end of the day, it's this very deep danger of aggregating all of us individuals against, I think, the real ideal of democracy, which is self-determination of the individual and sometimes of groups. So if what we care about in this place, in this conversation today and tomorrow, is action, at the end of the day, what Europe we make, then again, a problem in making it rest on, European peoplehood can be an element of our conversation. But our ideal, and I share those who spoke in favor of direct democracy and indeed of being inspired by Switzerland, there is so much more that can be done to have many streams, like many rivers of intervention in the democratic space in Europe. But again, let's not rest it all on the one people argument. There's many other ways of grounding that claim.
All right, thank you so much, Calypso. Simon, I saw you raising your hand already some time ago. Let us know where you want to react.
That suits perfectly now, and I will just briefly comment on the question of the people, but from a maybe different point of view. I mean, I sometimes have a feeling when we talk about the people that it's like, when we ask who are the people, it's like asking who is God, It's always unclear who are the people. What is clear, I would say, is that we, so the white, secular, liberal European elite, don't trust the people anymore. So see the skeptical remarks from Francesca, for example, when she talked about direct democracy, the question of who is informed, who is not informed. What does it mean being informed? I mean, is, for example, Navalny a liberal hero, as he is now proclaimed, or is he a homophobe nationalist? The media as an authority is obviously questioned not only through social media, but also from politicians and citizens themselves. So there's a serious problem here in looking at the reality, obviously. So, the second thought in this, when we touched on the question of the people, was obviously Geraldine, who asked for political education. I always ask myself, when the term political education is branded, does it mean left or conservative political education? I mean, the term political in itself is not good or bad. You can do anything with political education. Or does political always mean left political education? Then you should probably add left political education. And I think it's a very valuable question to ask, if there's only a left vision of Europe thinkable today, or if we not only accept that there's a legitimate conservative democratic approach towards Europe, but also enhance the conservative image, for example, against the right-wing and right populist image.
Simon, I just wanted to ask you, what will be the main difference, according to you, between leftist political education and conservative political education?
Well, there's probably a lot of differences, I hope. I mean, if we look at the political landscape, there are differences in terms of, how to look, for example, as what is the force of political movement? Is it identity politics, or is it representation? I mean, this is something we touched upon earlier. I mean, I would still, for example, think that parliamentarization and the representation through parliaments is a very, very valuable thing. But obviously, from the left, this would be probably tested today, and from the right wings as well. So I just wanted to say that when we talk about political education, we have to make clear what we mean, you know. Coming back to Geraldine's point of memory, this could be, you know, culture and memory questions could then be a uniting force. Then we don't have to talk about left or right so much, but we can, you know, all put it together under this memory scheme. But yeah, I just think that we as intellectuals, and I think we should agree that, you know, we don't represent the people here in this panel, obviously, probably not even 10% of it. We as intellectuals should sometimes, I have the feeling, be a little bit more humble with our declarations of force, you know, establishing universal values and all of these things. Sometimes I have the feeling that it would be better that we just as intellectuals try to understand our institutions better and then make them as just and as transparent for other people as possible. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Simon. Geraldine, you can briefly react to...
Very briefly, thank you, Simon. Of course, with political education, I don't mean political propaganda. I mean something actually, when I was at school, for example, we had a debate in the German class about, does the majority always have right? This is for me political education, for example, you know. It's in order also to understand, to reflect about the concepts of freedom, of democracy, to be able actually to identify when political movements or parties are misusing the words, you know, are instrumentalizing words and values, which is happening today, so that people get totally confused, and they get confused about what actually freedom means and what actually does Europe mean. And so it is about to help people to being able to identify these manipulation strategies, and also to share a knowledge on same understanding of these values. That's it. If the words are getting totally confused like now, we don't have words anymore, so we can no longer exchange and we can no longer share knowledge, and we have to fight against this. And this is what I mean with political education. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to you both. Mathieu was raising his hand as well. Mathieu, what is your thought on this idea of a European demos in order to improve our European democracies?
Yeah, thank you very much. I will keep it as brief as possible. I very much agree with the interventions by Nicolo, but also by Geraldine. And I think I can build on them with two very general thoughts on the side, so to say. So the first thing that I miss a bit in the whole discussion up till now, but it was implicit to a certain extent, is that democracy really can be very dangerous. We know this. And I think Geraldine was hinting to that, and I fully feel the same way on that. So democracy can be very dangerous. That is a key thing to keep in mind. And democracy is very dangerous without rule of law. So rule of law is the other side of the coin, so to say, if you want to have a functioning democracy. And this is about minority rights and so forth and so on. But rule of law is not something static. You know, it's not something given. It has to be defined actually every day again in a new way, reacting to new and challenging circumstances. So it's a moving thing. It's not preset, it's in constant flux. And if you kind of take that as the starting point, that is the way to fight totalitarianism, which was, Geraldine, also something that you were referring to. This anti-totalitarian assignment to the free world is fought in the constant redefinition of rule of law as the other side of the coin, on which on the one side is the democracy. I would like to add two things to that. So to further fill this idea of the coin of democracy and rule of law. I think in understanding what it means to keep this vital, it's crucial to be aware of two things. Both, I think, have the best definition in a German word. Sorry for that. The first word is Zivilcourage. So you need individuals who not only understand what is going on and see dangers, but also have the power, so to say, to stand up against institutions, not to fight or destruct the institutions, but to keep them vital. So civilcourage is really an essential thing for European culture, so to say, I think. The other thing is also German, verstehen. We need to do day in, day out exercises of empathic understanding. So we need to place ourselves in situations of the other, as Calypso was referring to also, I think, a very relevant thing. So Zivilcourage und Verstehen are both crucial things to keep the thing, so to say, vital. And then a very last remark. I was very happy, and that is just a remark on the side with the reference to Jan Patočka by Nicolo, because he's one of the implicit sources of my intervention tomorrow. But that being said, the last remark is about human rights. I think human rights, yes, we can to a certain extent make a narrative that this is a European concept, but I think that is also something risky to do, because I think it's a Western concept in its modern conception. So this whole narrative, European narrative, a post-war European narrative of human rights is embedded in a transatlantic Western history, which of course has deeper roots. But I think that is very important if we claim something about human rights, that we are aware of the fact that this is maybe more a Western concept, so to say, than a purely European concept. That is just a side thought.
Thank you so much, Mathieu. I saw Orlando Figes raising his hand. And after that, I would like to go to Yuri briefly, and Reed has also prepared a reflection to Yuri's statement. So this is about the sequence. Orlando, please. Yes,
thank you. Yes, fascinating ideas, thoughts. I could extemporize on all of them, but I'd like to just pick up on Mathieu's comments, with which I'm very much in agreement. I think that it's the subject really isn't the myths of Europe. I mean, Europe has always been, always will be mythical, and it's a question of what you make of those myths. What's the agency that those myths serve? I think the myth is sovereignty, and the problem is the nation state, which is under great stress across parts of Europe. The narrative of Europe is, I think, as our commentators have already highlighted, very different in Central and East Europe from the way it is has been constructed since '45 in the Franco-German dominated element of the EU in its original form. So I think that if we want to keep Europe together all the way to the borders of Ukraine, we need to adopt a slightly different method. But that's to backtrack from what I really want to say, which is apropos Mathieu's comment about institutions. Speaking as a Brit, it's becoming apparent now that the sovereignty that was claimed for the UK in the referendum is actually about a power grab for the executive. And what we're seeing now is the executive pushing back against the legislature, which is essentially neutered now, and the judiciary, whose members who are not political appointments, as the Attorney General is in the UK, are resigning on principle from this government. So I think that the problem is all about how, fundamentally, I think the problem is democracy. I think the problem, what is the crisis here is democracy. We're not even sure amongst ourselves whether we believe in it fully. And without the sort of safety wheels of political education, civic activism, to make sure people vote the right way or according to the right principles. What Britain shows in the referendum is that democracy has produced and will produce, in the name of sovereignty, a very strong executive, where the divisions of power in the UK state now are being eroded. So, so I think it's probably fairly pointless to try to reinvent the wheel of Europe, or to come up with some program that will foster civic activism on an international basis across Europe. Great though those ideas are, and we should continue thinking in every possible way about how to do that. I think at the moment it's a much more fundamental battle that we have on our hands, which is how the politics of fear, which is where we are, the politics of fear is generating populist movements, not just in Central Eastern Europe, but in my own country, which is resulting in the erosion of basic institutions of rule of law, of the divisions of power, of everything that is in the principle of European politics since 1789, or since the American Revolution. So I think that we need to recast, in a sense, what we're talking about in terms of the nuts and bolts of institutions, very much as Mathieu was saying, rather than getting too caught up on universal ideas or nice, but probably for the moment impractical sentiments of international civic activism.
Orlando, just a question to you to follow up to this. You were speaking also about the dangers of democracy, and many people, of course, say that democracy is the best of worst, actually. So what, if I'm asking you, what would you prefer? Should we go on with this idea of democracy and use side wheels, as mentioned already by the others, or should we look into alternatives?
Well, yeah, I mean, if I put my hand on my heart and confess, I'm along with, you know, Gustave Flaubert is my great hero, and he was a great enemy of democracy. But then what he was asked, well, what should you have? He would probably have answered, you know, you need to have had a university degree or something so the informed only should have a vote. And there are people who argue this. There are books being published at the moment by people who argue this sort of thing. I can't go along with that. I don't think we can retreat from the democratic electoral principle. But I think that we are in a world now where elections probably mean less than they used to. I mean, look at Belarus, the election means nothing. Elections are too easily manipulated now. So we can't fight, you know, those who believe in the progressive ideals of Europe, which I think do exist, don't anyone get me wrong. Those who believe in those ideals have to think of ways of being cleverer to defend the institutions of elections. To defend the transparency, I mean, the people who've mentioned transparency of media, absolutely vital. You know, as soon as that idiot David Cameron said there would be a referendum, as eventually held in June 2016, the first thing I said, well, it's going to depend on this referendum's going to hang on the BBC. Because if the BBC plays a robust role as defending journalistic truth, shall we say, then it'll be okay. But if the BBC does what the BBC did, which is to allow the Leave campaign to make an extreme statement, like if we don't leave the EU, we'll be flooded by 40 million Turkish immigrants, or whatever it was they said. And if they allow that to be said, and then just show their so-called balance by allowing someone from the other side to say, well, that's not true, then the referendum will go the wrong way. And I'm afraid that the BBC ever since then, you know, as the main broadcaster, has been really cowardly in the face of right-wing pressure from the Daily Mail and from the government itself threatening to take away its funding. So, you know, the transparency of institutions, the medium of trustworthy news is all important here, as I would add, as a major institution. I don't know whether Matteo mentioned it, but that seems to me where the battle is. It's a much more fundamental battle over the actual levers of power than it is over ideas. That's all I'd say.
Thank you very much, Orlando. Before we go to Yuri to react to everything that has been said in the past hour, I wanted to ask Ritis, because Ritis also prepared something in reaction to your piece, Yuri. So Ritis, can you tell us what your thoughts were on Yuri's statement?
Yes, thank you. I was okay. I had my some of my thoughts prepared, and then listening to you, I thought I would change everything because many subjects were touched upon. But then after a while, seeing that we went many different directions at the same time, I decided to keep it as it is. So I would like to get back as if in school, you know, what was the assignment? So we were talking myth at the beginning. And I think the great defining myth of Europe is the very fact that Europe exists, which means a presumption that there is something we share. And here I would like to quote American philosopher of Lithuanian descent, Alfonso Lingis, who talked about a community of those having nothing in common, and a gated community, I would add. So in a word, Europe is a myth many of us choose to believe without a need for proof. So it is literally legendary. And a myth or a legend is a story. And to my mind, Europe is a fruit of imagination in many regards. And European imagination is transported around the continent and beyond by means of European education. And mind you that when we speak about the Western education, we have Europe in mind, first of all, because, well, it always starts from Plato or Aristotle, and then we move on to Renaissance and whatever. So in Europe, we are in a strange synchronization. And okay, Renaissance and Baroque comprise another important myth that we take for granted. That myth is a myth of common waves that roll over the continent, and then they stop at some point which we don't understand, and that point is the limit or limits of Europe, the edge, which feels like Europe. And Europeans, we may hate each other, we may fight, or we may kill each other, but at the same time, we still use the same textbooks. So it is the myth of synchronization, I would call it. And the mythical European education is based on, of course, literature and arts. And this is my argument for culture. And when we speak about political education and something else, I think it should be a derivative of cultural education or culture, because culture works slowly and allows time to think. And I think the word populism was very often used here today. So I think populists win because precisely they really know how to use democracy, and they really know how to use technicalities of democracy. And because we got too technical lately, we speak about effectiveness, we speak about results, and especially fast results we need. So for populists, this is a very fertile ground. But when we speak about culture and cultural education, it becomes a bit more difficult for them, because it allows us time to think, to contemplate, and in that way we can exactly fight. And I like that Flavia's word, fighting, because democracy is something worth fighting for. And to my mind, our identity is strictly cultural. European identity is strictly cultural. And the defining myth of Europe, I would say, is synchronization through imagination. And that's what keeps the European Union together, in my deepest belief. And that is why the European Union plays so well within our philosophers, liberal thinkers, and plays badly within, well, soldiers, some merchants, and some clergy. And the biggest task seems to be of how exactly, we must understand how exactly this European education works and to make good use of it. So I think this can be very, very helpful. So that's it from me at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aritis. So synchronization to imagination, that is really interesting. I think that could be the slogan of the Forum on European Culture as well, maybe. Quickly, Reka, I saw your hand, and then we go to Yuri before we go to the second statement by Livia.
Okay, so I just want to add something about the very arbitrary and or accidental nature of these things that we are defining, both European culture and Europe itself around, and the whole discourse is using these tools. And I think it's very useful, Ritis, that you mentioned that we always start with Plato first, and that is because these are the textual memories that did survive. It is not because this was divinely chosen and is a natural truth. And as we know, natural truths are very hard to uncover, and they are usually filtered through some kind of human understanding. So when we're talking about Europe as a whole, it's and some kind of common descent, I think what we can come back to, even though I do very much agree, or I do very much appreciate Yuri's sort of provocation of finding a common descent in the legal systems, even though the criticism from Nicolo is very right, that there's no like one common root or that everybody shares in that sense. But I think instead of some kind of common descent, we may as well just think about how very arbitrary common descent in itself is. Either common descent is something completely intentional and set up in a certain way, and that's Habsburg inbreeding at its best, right? Europe was really great at that. That is, and I'm not even joking here, I sincerely mean this, that this is what this discourse takes us to. And, you know, as a subject of the former Austro-Hungarian monarchy, I really should bring them up sometimes in a bad light. But also, you know, when you're talking about descent, you're talking about unions of people that were made out of decision. Maybe your mama and your papa didn't come together because they decided to, but somebody decided that they should form a unit that results in you in some shape or form. Even if, you know, any child of divorce will attest that this is most often not written in the stars. And we can also expand this, or I would expand this to a national belonging, or belonging in Europe, moreover, because after all, at least in my understanding, as someone who was raised in a large part in Europe that didn't consider itself belonging in Europe, being Eastern European. And when we were going to join the EU, the slogan was, we're going to Europe, which from my understanding was very weird, because I thought Europe lasted until like the Ural or something, right? Because in my head, Europe never was the European Union. It still isn't, as much as America isn't the US, and it's an important distinction. But also, at least it also is a geographical unit, as arbitrary as geography is, because that's also just, you know, like, so then is Russia Europe, or is Turkey Europe, or aren't they? Or what do we think of the Middle East, and at which point in history, or at which point in politics? So what I would go for is to sort of highlight and include this very arbitrary framework, and admit that what we are seeking in a common dissent, if that's conceptual, if that's legal, if that's philosophical, is just that we are looking for a tool for external determination. We are looking for a means of telling ourselves that this is supposed to be like this, instead of what I think was very interesting about, you know, the Swiss statement about themselves, that this is belonging by choice, which is, to my mind at least, is a much more favorable type of union. So why not say that Europe is the people and the culture that happens to be here, either by choice or, you know, just because you were born here, which is, unless you very strongly believe otherwise, it's a very accidental thing. And if you don't think that, then we may not agree on anything, basically, at this point. So why not say that this is just a unit that we get, and we don't have to find some kind of external justification of it being the closed up, airtight unit that it never was, right? And then it's very easy to diffuse these weird campaign slogans that I just came across on the streets a few weeks ago now. You know, the Hungarian government has never actually invented anything. So they have always stolen campaign slogans, mainly from US Republicans, but you know, they go all over the place cherry picking. Now they are campaigning for making the Carpathian Basin great again, which is very weird, because in Hungarian, great translates into different words. So when they say Nagyát tesszük a Kárpát-medencét, it actually means we are going to make it big again. And then, you know, you think, are they going to inflate it some way? Because it's pretty much defined by, you know, mountains. It's very hard to move those, right? So if you move beyond this and accept that there is no determination about this, and that you can decide that you are not obliged to live and die here, unlike our hymn says so. There's like no way out. You have to deal with this. There is actually a choice, and you can make the choice of staying here. I think that's a much more liberating thing, and then it allows people in.
Thank you. So Europe should be a combination of people who decide to live there, and also some people that didn't even have an option. So yeah, thank you so much. Ritis, you can quickly react to it, and then we really go to Yuri.
Yeah, I very much like this account about the Hungarian situation, because it shows how populists are keeping it simple, and it works by keeping it simple. And the European Union is very complicated. It's very sophisticated. So in a way, we have to study Europe, to learn Europe. It takes time. It is not simple, it is difficult, and it requires, well, a person's input. That is why it is always difficult. And that is why there's a danger of imitation here. We have Orlando here today, and he has written this wonderful book. I would like to show it. It's called Natasha's Dance, A Cultural History of Russia. And basically, he argues in that book that the cultural history of Russia is a history of imitation. So the danger that we have in discussions like this, and basically in the European Union, is that we imitate something. So I think it is very important for us to get back to real things and to understand what we really do have and what we can really do, as opposed to simple measures taken by populists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritis. Yuri, a lot has been said in the past hour. Can you kind of react to this, or on specific points you heard where you wanted to add something?
So much has been said. Let's keep in mind, this is a very serious business, but on the other hand, it's very, very wonderful that we're talking to each other, you know, on these things, as, you know, from all over Europe. And yes, of course, like Reka says, you know, we don't define Europe as the union. Especially not, you know. And I like to say a few things about the many, many wonderful things I've heard. And I'm really very upbeat about this conversation, because it is possible to have these conversations. We do have sort of a lot of the same concepts and ways of thinking. And I just want to come in on the Jan Patočka thing. Yes, of course. I mean, it's wonderful that you refer to him, Nicola. The whole idea, of course, of ambiguity is central to the whole cultural European idea, I would say, as long as we won't go along with the idea of empire. And you're absolutely right. The idea of empire is a real danger for the European way of living and thinking. And you mentioned the Ottoman Empire, which of course the Ottoman Porte is again an imitation of the Caesars. So I would say you could include them and Moscow in it as well. I mean, the Tsar and the Ottoman ruler are imitations of the Caesars. But there is a real danger in that as such, of the ambiguity. But I want to also point to the other founder of Charter 77, Patočka is one of them, of course, and the other is Václav Havel, of course, and his essay where he says, he tries to live in truth. One of his essays about, the possibility of living in truth, and I think. Calypso said rightfully that I provocated, of course, because this myth of common descent, of course, it's not real common descent, it's myth of common descent, but perceived realities as real reality in many cases. So it's a provocation, sure, but it's a way to start to simply talk about the ways populists use, as Ritis so rightfully said, they know how to use democracy. So what I've heard around us is 2 cheers for democracy, but maybe 3 cheers for rule of law, and the combination of the two. And that's why I think that one of the very simple ways of making the idea of Europe work for citizens and in practice with institutions is through our common legal history and the rule of law. And again, that's the same, I would say, approach as Charter 77 took. It's the individual which count and not the state as a goal. It's the individual through the rule of law, and that's to protect the individual. And I would say that if we have any possibility of coming to something of a practical and a framework in which to work, it might be this idea of the right for the individual and the common legal history we have or could find. I also like to. I also was very and maybe referenda are a way of educating the people in a democratic and legalistic way, or maybe they are very dangerous. Or maybe that would be very dangerous. I mean, you could argue that as really both ways. Of course, you can. And I think what Simon said, that it's obvious that the elites are very afraid of the people by now. That's true. And that's a very, very telling thing. Could we repair that by abhorring to legal principles or legal institutions, like Ritis so rightfully said? Institutions are very important. And I would agree, the press is, I would agree with Orlando Figes, what he said about the BBC. The press is one of the crucial central institutions of our democracy. And I think what Calypso Nicolaidis said is very true. We all agree that there should be something like a working democracy. The question is just how we make that work. And I think the idea that we all agree on that is already really important. And another thing I'd like to say, yes, we are, like Nicola pointed out, we are a bunch of, as far as we can see, white Europeans. But remember, this is on purpose put together as diverse as we could, because diversity in Europe doesn't, Europe, when we speak about it, we have the tendency to make the Union and the European idea into a Western European idea. I think it's very, very important to include the Central and Eastern European ideas and identity and in it. And that's already, we have to be very careful to not move on in the Western European way and make it Western European Union. Because like Vasil rightfully said, what about borders for for universalism is all very well, but what about borders for countries which are under attack? And that makes it a whole different discourse, of course. So I would say that in order to get something of a common narrative going, and I thought the way of putting that, a synchronization through imagination, and imagination is a narrative, is a wonderful way to put it, but be very careful to include the Eastern European imagination in that as well. These are just a few remarks, a few thoughts on what I heard. It wasn't meant, my introduction, as a proposal, but more as a moment to kick off. And I would repeat the sort of the idea of Václav Havel, that there is a possibility to live in truth, and that's maybe a legalistic approach and not a democratic approach. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yuri. I heard so many people say indeed that speak about the importance of institutions, about the rule of law, about the press, and it's also so striking that in many European countries it's exactly these organizations that are very much under pressure. So I think that's not for nothing that we have to very much defend those institutions and organizations. I wanted to go to Orlando. Do you want to react to that?
Just a little footnote I'd like to add. We always talk about freedom of speech, but freedom of assembly often gets forgotten. If you go back to the early, the 18th century revolutions that established the political world, the legal principles with which we now live, freedom of assembly was right up there. And I think we're at a time now when, I mean, even in my own country, the government is introducing a law now to define Extinction Rebellion as a terrorist group, therefore unable to have any sort of street presence whatsoever. So just a footnote, let's not forget freedom of assembly, because that's important as it is today, in Belarus.
Thank you very much, indeed. I would like to go to the second myth of today, or the second statement of today that was prepared by Livia Gerster. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm a bit afraid of my internet connection actually, because I'm in a hotel. So if I freeze or something, maybe you can give me a sign and I will try without the camera. But for now, let's try it with camera. So I will talk about the myth that the European Union is anti-democratic and over-bureaucratic. In my abstract, I was only writing about the myth of the EU regulation spleen, but I decided to take in also the aspect of the lacking democracy, because actually these accusations come together usually. So the myth that I will talk about, I will call it: the EU is an anti-democratic disgrace run by faceless bureaucrats. I'm sure we all heard these accusations often, and we talked about democracy, but maybe not as concretely as the blame goes, which is what Eurosceptics say, that it's an undemocratic superstate, basically the EU forcing pointless constraints on the peoples of Europe. And it always sounds as if in far distance, a bunch of faceless sadists are having fun bullying us with countless regulations, even though we didn't elect them. So what I don't want to do here, obviously, is a PR campaign for the European Union, because you can find all that on the website of the European Commission, and all these myths untold as well. So my conclusion will not be that only the opposite is true and the EU is a democratic paradise with perfect mechanisms. But I think still it's very important to tackle these two allegations, one, the lack of democracy, and the other, the overregulation, because they really fall a long way short. And since they are so popular among enemies of Europe, I think it's important to talk about them. So let's start with democracy, and let's do it briefly, because of course there are books filled with this. Yeah, we all know the accusations. Critics claim that the European Commission, which is the closest thing to a European government, probably you could say, that is not democratically elected, because the commissioners are proposed and appointed by the leaders of EU member states. And then this is mostly where the argument ends, but it completely dismisses the fact that the European governments themselves are, of course, democratically elected by the peoples of Europe. So, of course, I would argue that the Commission is democratic, not directly chosen, as maybe Flavia would prefer, but indirectly chosen, of course, by the citizens of Europe. And what's more, the European Parliament, which is directly elected by the European citizens, has also the power to approve or reject the candidates as well as their legislation proposals. So, so if we come back to the comparison that the Commission is something like the European government, I would like to ask in turn, do you in your nation states get to elect the ministers of your cabinet? Do you have a say in who becomes, let's say, the foreign minister after national elections? I'm not familiar with all the different political systems, but for Germany, I can say that this is definitely not the case. In Germany, after the elections, basically the parties form a coalition on the base of the majorities they got, and then they spend nights talking and making deals about who gets which ministry, and basically the next day they present the surprise government to the people. So I would say the same is true for Europe, but one big exception, which is that the parliament checks each candidate for the Commission in a 3-hour session. So if I compare it to Germany, if you want, so I would say you could say that in this aspect, Europe is more democratic maybe than our German system. But of course, it's very right and important also to point out the limited powers of the European Parliament, which it definitely has, because unlike national parliaments, it doesn't even have the power to initiate legislation. It can only approve or reject or maybe propose amendments to the proposals of the Commission. But still, I would say that you have to acknowledge that it's continuously gaining more power, and it has been granted in many a stay in many fields with the Treaty of Lisbon. And after all, it has control, full control over the Commission. So, so in conclusion, I would say indeed there is room for improvement, and it's not a democratic ideal, but to call it anti-democratic is simply wrong, because no national European democracy is functioning like depicted in a textbook, and then to accept the flaws on a national level, but call them out on the European level means to have double standards. And as we said before, it's a democracy consisting of 27 different democracies with different standards and different systems and traditions, of course. So it's complex and complicated by nature. And in a world where most people, I think, even if we have other ideas, but I think most people in Europe still don't want to dismiss national borders, then in the consequence, the European Union always has to be a compromise and a project in progress. So now let's come to the second part of my myth, which is complaining about the EU regulation spleen, which is always going together, as I said before. And there are countless examples of allegedly absurd regulations from the tyrants in Brussels. I think we all know them. One of the favorites until today is that the EU bureaucrats have banned all bent cucumbers, which is really not up to date, because already in 2009 the EU dismissed these norms for vegetables and fruits in general, but still more than 10 years later it still serves Eurosceptics as a prime example of EU regulation madness, even though already in the beginning it was an idea of the business lobby, right, because it's just easier to pack straight cucumbers in standardized boxes. But I want to talk about two regulations from the past years that are actually still in place. And so one is the regulation for vacuum cleaners, and the other for data protection. So the first myth goes that EU bureaucrats have banned high volume vacuum cleaners. And so as a consequence now homes won't be properly cleaned. And of course that's not true, because more efficient machines will have the same effect, but just need less power and therefore help to save energy. And this was also this was Europe's aim to achieve its climate targets and reduce its emissions. Yeah, but basically this thing became a popular story among anti-EU campaigners in the UK, and even though it was meant to help the climate, in the end it served anti-EU campaigners as an incitement for Brexit. And I would argue that even though it's a very different topic, that the same basically happened with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which indeed has a very bureaucratic name and brought new rules and obligations for all of us, which are specifically annoying for bloggers or everyone dealing with data. But first and foremost, this whole thing was meant to protect us from greedy data hunters such as Facebook, Amazon, Google. And I would argue, even though it's annoying, it's just a matter of politeness, because before taking your data, I will ask first. And so I would say new times require new rules. And in the 90s, of course, the internet was a big democratic promise. And of course, it does grant all of us access to information and people from all around the world. And it gives us a voice, even if we're no public figures. But over time, this wonderful world became something like a legal vacuum and a place of hate and lies. And billion-dollar companies have absorbed the innocent internet, and and they're doing their businesses with it, and also ugly businesses, which is stealing data or creative work that doesn't belong to them but to us. So that's why I would say, yes, it's very important to have this regulation, and we need protection from misuse and hate, and we need also competition, and only rules and regulations can give that to us. So I want to make a step back and compare this to other groundbreaking inventions in history that show that there's no progress without problems, and then in the consequence also regulations. That's the way it goes. If we think of the invention of the wheel, of course it made transport so much easier, but then also humans died in accidents or animals died. And so already in ancient Rome, actually, there was driving bans in certain areas during the day. Or many centuries later, the invention of the electric bulb, which of course enlightened the darkness, but then factories and cotton mills were burning down time and again because they weren't as safe yet. So at the end of the 19th century, the first safety regulations for electric facilities were introduced. And I would say the same is necessary for the trade with vacuum cleaners and for digital data, because since the trade doesn't know national borders, we need transnational regulations. And as these examples from the past show, new freedoms need new rules, and many of them make much more sense on a European level. So I would end with saying that yes, rules are annoying and regulations, but without them, all of our new freedoms will only remain freedoms for the stronger ones.
All right, thank you very much, Livia. So new freedoms need new regulations, but at the same time, you could also state that this is exactly what makes a lot of Europeans so scared about the EU. I think this is a really interesting point to make, and we have asked Vasil Cherpanin to react to this. Vasil, what were you thinking when you were reading the statement, or when you were listening to the statement?
Yeah, thanks so much. again, I also may have some internet connection problems. So if I'm frozen, you just can signal this to me. So yeah, thanks so much, Livia, for this introduction. So do you hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, because I see that some of the images are frozen.
We perfectly hear you so
yes
far.
Or not? Oh, okay. So sorry. I think in general, to referring to what Livia was saying and somehow taking into account of the previous discussion that we had, I think this collective endeavor within our Civic Council on European democracy, although again being totally in line with this pathos of liberal leftist pathos that we all have, and I like. Also personally and politically, I would love Ukraine to be part of this EU bureaucracy rather than being a side of it. But at the same time, I think that in order to really make some emancipative political outcomes from this kind of discussion, I think it's really very important to keep in mind that our goal or our attempt is not just to, so to say, to improve the image of the EU, to improve the representation of the EU institutions. Of course, there is lots of things to be said about the EU to unveil the myth, to jump deeper in here. There is something deeper in that. Just because I'm a bit afraid not to turn this kind of discussion into a kind of sort of PR strategy for the EU, you know, as if you are as intellectuals functioning as a PR department of the European Union or Europe in general. So when we are like trying to deconstruct and unveil different myths, I think we shouldn't be trapped by what exists already in the realpolitik, in the political field. So I think that it's that we have to be much more defined not by what really exists, but what is lacking now. And so I think that in this sense, it's not just to create some new narrative, new storytelling of the European Union or of Europe in general. But I think there should be some actions apart from this intention. And what do I mean here is that basically we have somehow to go, as for me, in a kind of an antagonistic way, so to say, meaning that we have to put Europe versus Europe today. Not just that there are different narratives of Europe competing on the stage, but I mean here that pretty often we see that different Europe's antagonisms, crucial issues, are currently suppressed on the mainstream political level by the establishment, and that's why they are finding perverse way to be channeled, of course, through right-wing populism. So, and since the left has almost totally failed during the last decades, the right is becoming more and more far right. And I think we are not...
If I may ask you, what are the most important discussions that are lacking, that are being suppressed now, which should be brought to
I'm coming to this. So that I think that basically that pretty often we are somehow confined by the if there is any European ideology as such today, it is this one, which is saying that what we deal here today with is basically the conflict between pro-EU forces versus right-wing populists. And I think that the problem with it is that basically the current political establishment, the political center, let's say, which is in power in Europe still, with Ursula von der Leyen and stuff like that, is basically able to propose only some neutral consensus. Let's find some consensus, whereas politics is very much about dissensus. And the problem is today that all this dissensus, discontent, fear, and anger is left to right-wingers, is not approached and is not addressed in a pro-European discourse. That, I think, is one of the biggest problems, because whenever we face some ideological polarization today, like in Belarus today, for example, or political discontent or anger, we usually are tending to stick to some political norm. So we believe that the political center, the political norm can save us from the extremes. That was basically the recipe of the Macron's success. This famous anti-populist populist proposing an alternative from the heart of the establishment. So I think that the problem is actually not in the political extremes like right-wingers, but the problem is rather in the political center. And the political extreme is the symptom of the political center's inability to deal with inequality and other political conflicts today. So, and from this point of view, I think that there was this term was already used today, I believe, by Ritis, gated community. I think the biggest challenge that we face today that is basically that the way how the EU is structured and how the way it operates, because the dominant type, the dominant model of the EU governance today is basically to push the conflicts beyond the European borders, beyond the European wall, which today runs clearly on the external EU borders. So that the European Union, the European people feel like in the gated community. So to externalize problems beyond the European wall, to push the conflicts outside in order to keep the interior safe, to keep the center safe. But the problem here is that you cannot keep the center safe through punishing the peripheries for the Union's own crisis, right? When, for example, the logic of borders is being multiplied within the EU, what used to be a free Schengen zone, we see these migration waves coming to Europe. And so the result of these bordering conflicts, of this kind of externalizing strategy towards conflicts from the side of the EU, the result, the main outcome of this strategy is basically a new European tribalism. So it is because of this new European tribalism, it is this one which makes migrants scapegoats for former crimes and for collective guilt of the nations in Europe where they arrive. So so in this sense, I think when preparing to this session, I was also like following some developments. So we can see clearly like the dominant mainstream discourse is basically very keen to stress how our Europe is being threatened by right-wingers and by other global concerns. But what I think is lacking here is basically what also Yuri already mentioned. It is this class dimension. Yeah, because it is not the conflict between pro-EU forces and right-wing populists. It is rather the new European class war or old new European class war, which is behind this ideological surface. And we have just to follow the symptoms of this new European class war currently. Now, for example, what was really very symptomatic, look at what Franz Timmermans, right, who is currently European Commission first vice president, as if I am not mistaken, who before the European elections was nominated as an official leading candidate. There is this very beautiful German word, Spitzenkandidat, right, to be the next European Commissioner, right? So when he was addressing at the party congress, at the Socialist Party Congress, when he was addressing to his comrades, he said basically the following, I am quoting: "The world is changing so fast that you either adapt or you become obsolete." So, of course, as a wild communist from the East, as a class, one has to recall here the famous iconic 11th thesis on Feuerbach by Marx, that philosophers have always wanted to interpret the world, but the thing is to how to change it. And just to finish, so why we are surprised today that when socialists are calling to change with the world and adapt, it is the only political force willing to change the world is, of course, the far right, because there is no other political force able to propose even that. Or listen, for example, to the rhetorics of the France National Rally, which was formerly called the National Front, which actually won the European elections over the Macron's party, by the way, right? So they appointed a 23-year-old somebody called Jordan Bardella to lead their election campaign because, I'm quoting, in troubled times, we give the chance to young people.
Sorry, Fasil, we didn't hear the
working class.
Fasil, we didn't hear the last sentence you said. Could you maybe repeat it?
I will quote that it was the rhetorics how the National Front justified why they appointed this new guy, 23-year-old Bardella, to lead their election campaign. So they were saying that in troubled times, we give the chance to young people coming from the working class background. So I mean that it is today the right-wingers who are speaking about the working class, not the left. Isn't it like the most visible symptom that we deal today? So in this sense, I think, of course, it is something to be reformative, because this way of the modus operandi of the EU, which is just trying to distance all the conflicts to the outside, is basically multiplicating inside and actually affecting the very center of Europe, whatever the imaginary this center is. So I think that this class dimension and legal battle around citizenship are basically the two most important realms for political emancipation today.
Yeah,
that's in short, but we can follow up later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's a really important point you make, Fasil. Simon, I saw you laughing 2 times, and you also prepared a reaction to Olivia. So I'm very curious what you thought and what your reaction would be to both Olivia and Fasil.
Okay, but I'm sure a lot of other people want to say something as well. I don't know, but I can just start very quickly, and then others take over. I
we still have some time.
I laughed because I found it a great. I mean, 2 great statements, but especially Vasil's fear of intellectuals as a PR section. I mean, yes, that is obviously a problem, and we actually have to think about this. And also, what he's obviously argued very fiercely for a new take on the class dimension, and that the right wings nowadays take over the working class as their potential force in society, and that the left obviously has in a lot of dimensions has lost the touch, obviously, into this milieu. So I can't really I can just say that was a wonderful and provocative statement. In some sense, I would say that it didn't really react or criticize Livia, because I thought she made a very good argument, constitutional argument, basically why the European Parliament is, or the European Union is obviously not perfect democratic, but then, like she said, German or French or other state constitutions are also not perfectly direct democratic. So that's just a fair point. Coming to the overregulations, I would say, I agree, there is no absolute freedom. You always need rules to preserve the freedoms once achieved for future generations. But that is a very broad and general belief on which few people would probably deny. However, I feel that the common opinion today is that when it comes to Europe and its regulations, it is not about freedom. It is about making a diverse continent of 27 complex countries coherent at all costs. So, that is just the problem we're facing. And I think I have to agree in this, that it's not our role as intellectuals to give the European Union a better PR section, but we really have to see what the critics are about. So the quick question is, in my opinion, did the regulations over the last, say, 60 years of the existence of the European Union idea help to bring Europe together? Or did these regulations not rather fuel oppositions and breaking apart? So I think this is really the key question. So when you could ask, why did the people vote against a European constitution in France 2005? Because they were fierce nationalists who were driven by hate against the common European spirit, or because they feared bureau, or some would even probably say autocratic consequences for their economies, their markets, and their homelands, basically. And same, obviously, Orlando touched on this, the question of Brexit. Obviously, why did the people vote in favor of Brexit? Because they were so hard out refugee haters and reactionists, or because they saw that more and more regulations would be installed and controlling takes over local sovereignty. So I just think that we have to ask these questions. I mean, what did these regulations actually achieve for what we all strive for? A common unity. Did they help? Or did they just help economy in some sense, you know, and making the markets go smoother, and all of these questions, obviously, which come when you ask for the class struggle and all of this. I came when Livia had her talk. I came across this very famous sentence we have in Germany from a former DDR activist, Bärbel Bohley, who, you know, after the wall came down 30 years ago, and she went to have a speech in Parliament a couple of years later, she said this very famous quote: "We wanted justice, and what we got was a constitutional state." So it was the right state, basically, which was already in some sense institutionalized. So they just, you know, they wanted justice, and what they got was regulations, in some sense, you could say. So I mean, I don't agree, obviously, and I see that this is a very complex problem. But yeah, I just wanted to say that even especially today, one day after the speech of the nation of Ursula von der Leyen, when she declared again the importance of, yeah, you could say, regulations in the sphere of the digital era, everything has to be digitalized. Our future is digitalized. Future. You know, there I really have the question, obviously, if this is really the only way we should talk about Europe. Digital regulations, or if we not rather talk about justice, Belarus, real like political injustice problems we're facing right now. And so in some sense, yeah, I would in this sense argue against you, Livia, and I'm happy to hear more thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Orlando, would you like to react to this?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to ask, really. I mean, I'm very impressed by the comments, and I'm in broad agreement with everything that's been said. But I wonder whether, I mean, if we look at the UK referendum again, sorry, I don't want to get obsessive about it, but it is quite instructive for our discussion. There seems to have been a disconnect between, I mean, people understood, farmers, for example, fruit growers understood that what the regulations did in terms of protecting their markets or protecting labour rights, but then they still voted to leave. So there seems to have been a disconnect between what the actual regulation achieves in constructive, positive citizens' rights and what people actually feel or fear, which directs their voting. And I just wonder whether this is connected perhaps with the decline of trade unions, because it seems to me that in Britain, the only real ally of the EU as a regulatory force, which is, God knows, needed, are the unions. But they're very, very weak in Britain. And I wonder whether that's true across Europe, that short of, I don't know, are there powerful consumer groups? Are there I mean, what is it across Europe that can be the PR department of the EU if the intellectuals are disbarred from this role? Because God knows the EU does need a PR department to get across the benefits of its regulations, if it's to not have Brexits elsewhere across the continent.
Ritis?
just a short comment on Brexit, if you will. I think it's down to journalism very much, the Brexit thing, down to media. And the problem seems to me that the European Union still is weaker than the international press conglomerates are. And there is no connection, basically. And basically, even today, in this meeting, we speak a lot using, how should I put it, notions or understandings that are sort of imposed on us by the international media. I mean, speaking about those cucumbers or whatever else, these are media things. These are media balls they used to play. We are used to play with. Me being a representative of media in a way. And as you know, in Brexit situation in England, since it has joined the EU, there was not a one positive headline about the European Union ever in Britain. So that speaks volumes to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritus. I was also wondering if there is anyone who wants to react to the specific point of Mr. Figes about a new kind of groups, PR groups for the union, so to say, in other European countries. And he was referring to trade unions, for example. Is there anyone who wants to share a thought on this point? Mathieu?
There's one very general thing here, but because Orlando also used the word consumers, and I think we have seen a shift in the last decades from citizens, being represented in their identity as workers or producers, and in those two roles also, talking to each other, finding compromises, reconciling certain problems. To consumers, and to consumers only, actually. And if you look to the regulations of the European Union, they are all rooted in the internal market, where the European citizen is not so much a citizen, but a consumer in the end. That is the definition that is leading all the regulations. And there is this tension, and this is a very important and fundamental tension, and it's also about the credibility of the claim of rule of law and human rights. This tension between, words of citizenship, human rights, and all that on the one hand, and the reality of being reduced to a consumer, and in that sense, a number on the other hand. And that is also why this whole narrative about the EU being a super state in the making and a totalitarian project, when you really look to it deep down, what some of the very strong political forces at the moment are claiming, not only in Britain, but also in every other European member country, and even outside the EU, they are saying, watch out, this is a totalitarian project. And it is in essence often about this point, that citizens are not citizens. This is just, a fake story. They are consumers, and because they are consumers, they are numbers, and because they are numbers, they have no rights, and they are, steered by the circumstances of globalization.
Just a quick reaction from Orlando Figes.
Yeah, I just want to come back on that point because, the issue, the consumer point, which I think you're right about, does lead to the victory of basically free market, basically unregulated issues, doesn't it? Because, in Britain, as a result of the referendum, the situation now is that we face the possibility of chlorinated chickens and everything else from America coming in at a lower standard of animal welfare, consumer protections, etc. But the argument is, well, consumers can choose. You can choose between the chlorinated chicken and the organic chicken, and but I think I was really asking whether, I mentioned the word consumer because it seems to me that there is a tradition in Europe of consumer organizations, of people protecting consumers as citizens, not just as the numbers of a free trade equation, but as people who want protection of standards, food standards, and so on. Go on.
If I may
Sorry,
add something, what I also really heard in your question, Mr. Figes, is actually a question of representation. So who is representing the will of the people? And is it the intellectuals that do that? Or is it the trade unions that do that? Or I think this is a really fundamental point for the discussion as well.
That is, thank you. That is what I had in mind, that if we are to be defined as consumers rather than citizens, then who's to protect our interests as consumers? Because we're not just the market for business. We have interests in how we consume, what we consume, and where we source what we consume, etc. And I just don't see those institutions powerful enough to connect with the regulatory bodies of the EU to protect Europe's citizens as consumers.
Geraldine, I also have to let you know that we are about to end this session. So I will first go to Geraldine, then Calypso, and then Simon. And I'm afraid then we have to wrap up and save all the important points for tomorrow and take it up from there. But first, Geraldine. Yeah,
I have also just a general comment, maybe reacting also to what Mathieu said. What I missed was the ruling class of the EU is that I had the feeling that their understanding of society is limited by economic and technological paradigma. So the consumer algorithm, money, growth, it's an idea which is very pregnant in the European Union, and that this might undermine our ability to appreciate what cannot be measured in numbers, which is, it was mentioned, the social justice, conscience, morality, freedom, values in general, and finally the human himself. And I pick up on what we said before. The human is not only rational, it is also irrational. And if this dimension of the human being is denied, which I think it's a bit the case in the European Union, then demagogues use this void for their political purposes and appeal not to positive emotions, because irrationality is not only negative, but they appeal, of course, to the lowest instincts of man. So I think, just to come back very quickly, we need a narration, and this doesn't need to be an invention or a reduction. I think there are two lines of thoughts we can share without lying, and which is the humanism. And it's not only human rights. It's more, in general, I repeat myself, about the fact that the human should always be the end and not the mean. And I think everybody can actually agree on that without seeing in this a Western value, I hope. Because this also means that in Europe, this could be a definition that in Europe, one can choose his identity. So it's an open definition, which we could have for Europe. You can choose your identity. And of course, this is not easy to choose your identity, as it is not easy to face freedom. It is something you have to learn. This is why I propose the political education. And the second line of thought is, of course, the historical memory. And I would like to pick up on what Yuri said. It is very important to have an inclusive European memory and to include the experience of the Eastern countries, because I can say in France, for example, we have no clue about the experience of the Eastern countries under communism and under the Soviet Union domination. And this creates an asymmetry in the European memory, which leads to the situation we have today, that many Eastern Europeans don't believe in this European story. And so to have a credible European memory, we can build bridges and also include the memory of colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Simon, and then Calypso. Simon, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. I also hear a phone ringing.
That's not mine.
Okay, it's over. Yes, Simon, I wanted to...
Very briefly, and then maybe we give Livia also the chance to react. I just wanted to pick up, I mean, what Geraldine just said is obviously true. And the human and the end of everything is exactly what we need. And that's why I think we can criticize von der Leyen's speech yesterday so harshly, because she just talked about digitalization. And for example, I mean, I was amazed by the way she was talking about, you know, people sitting at home and buying goods over the internet. That is the future, you know, that's great in some sense. And so I think this is really the problem, because then we come to the point Orlando made with the consumers. Then we really are only consumers, and especially consumers without interaction with other consumers. We're only individuals ordering goods over the internet. And if that's the future, then I think the future of the democracy is really at stake. So let me just finish with that.
Thanks so much. Calypso.
Yeah, I mean, I just would like to echo in part the discussion on consumer and the limits of the EU. In a way, it's a mindset. You know, I think tough love is very important for the EU. And the more critical we can be, the more idealist in a way we can be. And at least that's my own bias. And in that sense, I think that, I mean, what Livia was saying was very important and interesting. But there's also a really deep connection between bureaucratization and populism that we need to unpack, to the extent that, you know, if we go back to Max Weber, he spoke of the iron fist of democracy and of bureaucracy, and the fact that, you know, democracies start with good intention, rationalization, and all the rest of it, but end up very often in their self-fulfilling logic and keeping the rest of the world out. And this has happened in the EU in part. We can never generalize, and obviously the laws that are being made are often in our interest, as Livia was brilliantly, you know, demonstrating. But the problem is always the same. The citizens are kept out, mostly. The fact that we elect somebody at the European Parliament doesn't make much difference in that. And so I think we need to continue to think of individuals holistically, as Geraldine would say, you know, in a humanist way, which may mean, you know, consumer, and you as a professional, and you as a mom, and all the identities you have. But when you look at Europe, and what is produced, it's a lawmaking machine, it's a regulation-making machine. We need to be very, very vigilant and not complacent about not only whether it serves or not serves our interest, but whether we are the ones who decide what our interest is.
Thank you so much, Calypso. Livia, maybe you wanted to react to all the things that have been said based on your statement.
Sure, yeah, very briefly. I mean, I agree with all of you, with Simon and Calypso, and it's really not that I'm saying regulations are so sexy and, you know, we need to, I don't know, win the hearts of Europe with regulations, because no, that's obviously not the case. But since they are such a big argument by Eurosceptics, I think we need to address them and just, you know, have them straight and explain again what was the benefit and the reason behind all of that, even though of course there are many regulations that were pointless and that were also dismissed after a while for a good reason. And this is definitely a failure of the EU, that it's perceived mainly as a regulation machine and not for its values such as peace and freedom and other things. And I think it's also mainly this consumer thing that and I'm not sure if Livia is already back again.
Back.
But otherwise we will wrap up here because we received a lot of inputs and a lot of really interesting information. And actually we have another 2.5 hours tomorrow as well. And I think there's many interesting points to touch upon. And I especially also remember Vasil's statement that we should look at a way of addressing fear and anger that is present in many European countries in a way that is actually, in a way that is also good for Europe. And I think this is really something we should not forget. Tomorrow we will listen to important statements by Mathieu Segers and by Francesca Melandri on the importance of language. And I'm very much looking forward to that. If you don't have any questions or really urgent comments anymore now, I would like to wrap up and thank you very much for all the important points and the really interesting ingredients for a new narrative, a new idea of what it means to be European. Yuri, a last word to you, maybe?
Sorry for the technical ending of this, but it's about the end of this session. This is just the first session of 2, and of course the first session of 6, because we're planning on Palermo and on Warsaw later this year. Amazing conversation. Thank you very, very much for all your time and all your thinking out loud. I'm really, really inspired by it, and I think we're coming to the point where we're starting to realize that maybe the conversation on Europe and the EU specifically is blocking the view, and it's about democracy, a renewed class struggle, the institutions of democracy, and what kind of voluntaristic democracy we want. So that's at least what I'm taking away from this. So it's more fundamental. Orlando Figes already pointed to that. Many of you pointed to that. It's not about being the PR movement of the union, but it's about being fundamental to what we think a democracy is in need of, and Europe can and should be a democracy. So yes, Europe is very much included in that conversation, but it's, to me, much more fundamental actually than just a conversation about the union, which might be even blocking the view. So thank you very much for your profound, really profound insights and activism for this. I do look at this as activism and not as an academic conversation, but as a real important way of trying to think about, how our the rule of law and democracy can sustain individuals on our continent. And I think indeed I try to point out to that at the start, there is myth of common descent, but there's also the class struggle aspect of it. So thank you also, Vasil, for coming back to that, because I do think that's an important part of what we're discussing: consumerism, unions, institutions, and the way we look on democracy and whether we do think it's a voluntaristic act to belong together or not. There can be much more said about this. I really hope that we can, during this process, come to sort of a text which we agree on, or maybe sort of a minimum text, but that's way in the future. This is just the start of it. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. And don't forget to watch the rest of the forum's program today. So the opening program takes place at 4 in the International Theater Amsterdam, where we will see some of you at least. And there's an evening program with Francesca Melandri and Gideon Rathman at 8:30 this evening. So see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Hello, everyone. Sorry, something went wrong with the program. I'm happy to see you all here again. We were listening to Livia